Many other nations besides the U.S. are facing illegal immigration as a top political and social issue.
Are great numbers of people coming to Europe expecting a free ride?
Myślę, że w bardzo wielu przypadkach tak jest.
I think that in very many cases we have such a situation.
From a candid discussion with the president of Poland to Great Britain.
There's a lot of discontent. It's a boiling kettle.
In the United States, another presidential election, and immigration is again both a top and dividing issue.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us.
Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents.
We're in Arizona, both a border and battleground state, where the politics are fooling no one.
You know, promises are cheap by both parties.
Just in time for school season, the CDC is recommending a new round of COVID vaccines for children.
The adverse effects were mild to moderate.
We examine the messaging that hasn't changed in the face of cases of vaccine damage that heightens the call to question the science.
Welcome to Season 10 of Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin today with illegal immigration and the border crisis, top issues in yet another presidential election. And you may not have heard much about it, but there's a parallel calamity driving politics in Europe, where they're also struggling with a tide of illegal immigration. As they try to dial it back, it's already changed the face of Europe.
We're at Britain's largest mosque, where Muslims come to pray, and Imam Sabah Amidi takes a public role tamping down tension amid Europe's immigration crisis.
I do think the fear of immigration is not immigration itself. I think it's the fear of Islam and the misunderstanding of Islam.
What would you say is an example of a major misunderstanding people have, and what is your counterpoint?
Sure, I think people misunderstand Islam when it comes to terrorism. When people say that you have a Muslim terrorist, it's actually oxymoron. A Muslim is someone who strives for peace. As a Muslim, I can't advocate to kill innocent people. My faith does not allow that. No sane person would encourage the killing of innocent people.
Across Europe, illegal immigration is straining emotions at the seams, pitting religions and cultures against one another. The friction was evident during our recent visit to England. 3 children were murdered in a mass stabbing of 13 people. When the attacker was rumored to be a foreigner, anti-immigrant rioting broke out, as well as Muslim gangs attacking white people. Police say the stabbing suspect was actually born in Britain, the son of Rwandan immigrants. Today, vocal majorities in Europe overwhelmingly support greater restrictions on foreigners coming in.
We need to be able to control it and avoid illegal immigration in Europe because it brings with it a lot of dangers and risks for the population.
Public sentiment has taken a sharp turn since the welcome mat laid out in 2015. That year alone, Europe welcomed more than 1.8 million illegal or irregular immigrants, mostly from the Muslim nations of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In many respects, Europe's backlash against its surge in illegal immigration was centered here in Greece, where we first began reporting on the story in 2019.
This is Hellenic Coast Guard. This is Hellenic Coast Guard. For your safety, stop your engine.
The Greek Coast Guard showed us how they'd been forced to abandon Border Patrol duties to become a nightly welcome wagon for masses of illegal immigrants trafficked through Turkey on overloaded rafts. Europe tried to tap the brakes after a series of terrorist attacks by Islamic extremist immigrants in 2016. But foreigners continued to come. In 2022 alone, nearly 7 million people immigrated to Europe. The influx has brought economic costs, immigrant crime, and religious conflicts, including attacks on Christian churches by Islamic extremists and anti-Muslim burnings of the Quran. In 2019, we covered the turmoil in Malmö, Sweden, where violence against Jews escalated as the Muslim population swelled. We also saw the conflict in neighboring Denmark give rise to anti-Muslim politician Rasmus Paludan.
In Denmark, our party is fighting for the survival of ethnic Danes here in Denmark. The goal is for all the Muslims to leave Denmark.
In Europe, there's been a steep decline in the number of Christians. Islam is the #2 religion in the United Kingdom. Muslims number about 4 million, with the greatest concentration here in London, where they make up 15% of the population.
For most, Western Europe is the destination of choice. But Eastern Europe has begun to feel the pressure in the last few years. In 2021, analysts say, Russia began trafficking multitudes of people from the Mideast and North Africa through Russian ally Belarus into Poland, enticing them with the promise of free benefits in Europe. In a rare sit-down interview, Poland's President Andrzej Duda told us the Russians intend for it to create instability and chaos.
If someone comes over to Poland in the false perception that one will stay here and get everything for free and will have a better life without working, well, we do not agree to such arrivals. No, if you want to live among us, work. You want to live among us, get yourself moving and do some work, earn some money. This is as simple as that.
Are great numbers of people coming to Europe expecting a free ride?
Myślę, że w bardzo wielu przypadkach tak jest.
Yes, I think that in very many cases we have such a situation. That's why there is such a reaction in the west of Europe.
Poland responded to the onslaught from Belarus by building a 15-foot-tall border fence.
Donald Trump obviously wanted to build fencing and wall. You built a fence or some sort of barrier. There are parallels here that I just think are interesting that we don't hear much about in the United States.
The reason I'm describing the situation in Europe is because I want to show to you that you are not the only ones who are affected. Our continent, our societies are also confronting such a problem.
In May, a mob of illegal immigrants threw knives and spears through Poland's border fence, murdering a 21-year-old Polish soldier and injuring several others. Poland's parliament quickly passed a law allowing border guards to use live ammunition. As in the U.S., illegal immigration is driving politics, with all sides promising to act.
We're going to do the largest deportation in the history of our country. We have no choice.
We know our immigration system is broken, and we know what it takes to fix it.
Neil Coyle is a member of parliament with Britain's left-leaning Labour Party, which recently won a political majority and will have to try to find ways to stop illegal immigration that eluded the Conservative Party.
Where the public have a problem is illegal and unlawful entry into the UK. That's where the public have a bigger problem. There are different ways of fixing that, including, for example, coming back to Afghanistan, the biggest group of people crossing the English Channel in the boats unlawfully. They shouldn't be doing it. Nobody thinks they should be doing it. The way to fix that, in part, is to respect the fact that some of them fought for us and allow them to either join family here or come through our asylum process and arrive by flights and safely rather than turning up in a boat.
As both the U.S. and Europe continue to struggle with their illegal immigration crises, analyst David Cowling says it's a mistake to write off all opponents to illegal immigration as anti-Muslim or Islamophobic.
Yes, there's a lot of discontent. Billions of pounds are being spent in Britain to house asylum seekers and illegal immigrants. So that's causing resentment. I'm not quite sure how it ends, really. So there doesn't seem to be a clear path as to how it ends.
Has the face of Europe changed a lot in the past 20 years?
I think most Brits will champion the fact that we are a multicultural society. And I think it's really important that we have a reminder that just because somebody looks different or they have a different perception on life doesn't make them the other. Because when we categorize someone as the other, it can then lead to them being discriminated and targeted for no reason.
The law enforcement agency of the European Union says it's targeting the complex, ruthless smuggling networks that move illegal immigrants into Europe, generating billions for the criminal groups involved. Ahead on Full Measure to one of America's hottest spots for our own illegal immigration crisis. A recent study finds that the 20 million known illegal immigrants cost U.S. taxpayers more than $150 billion a year in government services, dwarfing what some of them pay in taxes when they work illegally. Taxpayers in the border state of Arizona spent $3.2 billion last year alone. Arizona happens to be a vital political battleground for Trump versus Harris, as Scott Thuman reports.
How many cattle do you have, Jim?
Currently about 750.
Jim Chilton is a fifth-generation rancher in southern Arizona with 50,000 acres stretching to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Good to see you.
You too.
He's always happy to see the Border Patrol at work because while his cattle roam the land, so do illegal border crossers and cartel smugglers.
So in 1 month, you had more than 5,000 people come through your property seeking asylum.
That's correct. Most of them, it's economic asylum. They don't qualify for under the law as true asylum seekers.
As we're talking, a Border Patrol helicopter flies overhead because suspects have been spotted. The chopper tries to direct agents on the ground to make an arrest.
They must have spotted a group coming through, and they sent the helicopter out.
Now, this is not unusual, you say?
Not unusual, nope.
Chilton set up security cameras on the ranch. They prove thousands have crossed here.
The Obama administration built this wall.
While sections of the wall were started under President Obama and were dramatically extended under Trump, it all came to a grinding halt at President Biden's request when he took office in January of 2021.
The day you say that Biden took office, you could physically see a change.
Absolutely. All the construction workers got in their trucks and went home. And since President Biden stopped building the wall, there's 5 times as many people coming through who are just trying to sneak into the country, not be apprehended.
While the total number of encounters recorded by Border Patrol is down this year from last year's record, December of 2023 saw 250,000 in just 1 month, making the issue a hot topic in Arizona's scorching 115-degree heat. Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance recently visited the Arizona-Mexico border, outlining a key marker of political attack in this year's campaign.
And it's just unbelievable. It is unbelievable what we're letting happen at this southern border, and we're letting it happen because Kamala Harris refuses to do her job.
That job, according to Republicans, included coordinating border policies for the Biden administration.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here.
The Democrats say the border czar label isn't true or fair for the vice president. But in a sign of how seriously they take the issue's impact this year, they're offering more border resources in a Harris administration.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents.
But no mention of what she would do about the tens of millions illegally in the U.S. already. President Trump has promised to deport most of them. Public opinion across the nation and in Arizona suggests more Americans trust Republicans when it comes to the border. In a poll earlier this year by the Pew Research Center, 79% of Americans said the U.S. government is doing a bad job managing migrants at the border. Our next stop, the Arizona border town of Douglas. Here, they've had a barrier well before Trump's wall was built, a reminder that illegal crossings has long been a problem. Mayor Donald Hewish is a registered Republican, but he doesn't like partisan labels.
How effective is the wall here?
It slowed things down, but it hasn't 100% taken care of things. When the Biden administration took over, they stopped total funding on the wall.
But I sense frustration.
It's very frustrating because we're left here not knowing. I honestly think that the Biden administration got overwhelmed. I think when they came up with their policy of allowing the border to be a little bit more open, that they were overwhelmed on the response that they got.
Do you think a lot of that changes if in November Donald Trump returns?
Well, you know, promises are cheap by both parties, but he at least showed in the past that he did funnel down and stop the border.
Back at the Chilton Ranch, we meet Jim's wife, Sue. The two have been married for 60 years.
We have gotten calls saying, don't go down to your southern pastures because they are currently having a shooting warfare between two factions of the Sinaloa cartel.
Chilton believes it will take another Trump term to secure the part of the border on his property. But keep in mind, for decades, previous administrations have been trying and failing to do just that. From California to Texas, America's long border has long been a problem. This year, both leading candidates say they have the solution, but if the past is any guide, voters shouldn't expect miracles. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman in Arizona.
Coming up on Full Measure, we have shocking evidence of the slanted information our doctors are being taught about the safety of COVID vaccines. We're now approaching 5 years since the start of the COVID nightmare. Since the beginning, scientists have said it's clear the disease doesn't pose a serious threat to healthy children, but the CDC is still recommending COVID vaccines for kids. Today, we look at the selective information being taught to doctors about that topic.
Today, most countries have officially determined that most kids don't need COVID shots. But in the U.S., the CDC still recommends COVID vaccinations for babies and children 6 months and older. And I found that American doctors are sometimes being given a slanted picture of the safety and effectiveness of COVID vaccines in children.
Welcome, everybody, to the final...
In May of 2023, the website Medscape, which has a left-leaning pro-pharmaceutical industry tilt, posted materials for a class about COVID in children. The course is a continuing medical education class offered to doctors to keep their licenses current. But the posted class materials don't directly address one simple, important question. What's the risk to children from getting COVID compared to their risk from getting the vaccines? And the doctor's class also doesn't acknowledge important cases like that of Maddie DeGarry, profiled last year on Full Measure. Maddie may have been the first child injured by COVID vaccines. At age 12, she entered Pfizer's clinical trial at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Within hours of her second experimental vaccine dose on January 20th, 2021, her health fell apart.
She said she felt like her heart was being ripped out. So chest pain, she had severe abdominal pain. She was hunched over when she walked through the door. Her toes and her fingers were white, and they were like, when you touched them, they were ice cold.
Soon, Maddie couldn't walk. By the time she was hospitalized for a third time, she was so sick she couldn't feel her legs, had an abnormal heart rate, was suffering seizures, passing out, vomiting, unable to swallow or eat, and had to be fed through a tube. Maddie was eventually diagnosed with a paralyzing immune disorder known to be associated with COVID shots and flu shots and other vaccines. But before we check to see if Maddie's case is reflected in the doctor's continuing medical education course, it helps to know who's presenting the class. The three instructors are introduced by their distinguished professional titles without mention of their extensive vaccine and drug industry ties. Not mentioned, instructor Dr. Barbara Rath is a consultant or advisor for AstraZeneca, GlaxoSmithKline, and Roche. Instructor Dr. George Cassianos advises or consults for Merck, Novavax, Pfizer, Sanofi, Takeda, and Valneva. And instructor Saul Faust has relationships with an A to V list of vaccine manufacturers: AstraZeneca, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Novavax, Pfizer, Sanofi, and Valneva. Looking at the presentation, it claims that COVID vaccines are up to 100% effective in kids. The generous definition of efficacy is questionable. The quoted figure only measured whether kids in the study had COVID 1 week after their second vaccine.
The efficacy against 7 days after the second dose was 100%.
Furthermore, the fine print at the bottom of the slide claiming 100% effectiveness indicates that stat is from the study led by Dr. Robert Frank, the one Maddie was injured in. In his findings, Dr. Frank reported there were no vaccine-related serious adverse events and few overall serious adverse events. And that's exactly what doctors were led to believe in the continuing medical education class.
The adverse effects were mild to moderate and in the form generally of injection site pain, headaches, fatigue, but no vaccine-related serious adverse effects.
For the purposes of educating other doctors, Maddie DeGarry simply doesn't exist.
In my new book, just out this week, I have more on conflicts of interest in the medical field and other reasons why we're growing sicker even though we're spending record amounts on health care. Check out Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, we're off to the swing state of Michigan, which could prove to be the deciding factor in the upcoming presidential election.
I was going to actually write God's name in for as a write-in vote. I was not going to I just could not. I could not support Biden. And so when he stepped down and Harris stepped up, I feel really enthused.
All eyes on a crucial battleground state next time on Full Measure. Until then, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.